You see that? Look, what is the essence of a democracy?
Aussiocracy.
All right, welcome to the first Aussiocracy interview. And with me today, I have Toby, the leader of the new Centrist Party. So welcome, Toby.
Well, thank you. It's nice to finally meet you and to discuss it today.
Great, welcome. So to anyone else listening, this is the very first time we're doing an interview with a minister of Aussiocracy, and we're just giving him the opportunity to tell us a bit about what his party is and a few of the policies that he's developed. Give people a chance to sort of get in on the debate and listen to what we have to say in a live interview. So let's just start off with the party itself. It's pretty exciting. It's the Centrist Party. And you've written a pretty comprehensive document as to the policy aims and values of this party. But I just wanted you to do a bit of a casual explanation to people listening. So basically, what is the Centrist Party?
Well, to me, the Centrist Party should be a party that is somewhat the will of the people and somewhat not, but they're there to try and get all the voices and get a balance on all the issues. For example, a centrist party should take some right-wing issues and some left-wing issues and try and get the centre point. Like a key issue is generally, for example, discrimination, or how can we balance our freedoms with making sure everybody in society is included. So it's all about trying to get a balance in a sense.
Okay, yeah, well, it can probably make sense. Being a centre party would be a balance. So how would it be different to more traditional parties? What is the difference with your party to others?
I mean, probably the closest party to the centrist party in Australia has to be the Liberal Party. But the centrist party is a little bit... they're not progressive, but they're a little bit more social. And a centrist party is different because they kind of take a new... for the next generation, and they take a new idea and they listen a lot more instead of being set in stone in traditional values. Okay. It's more about kind of listening to your peers and the people, because that's what democracy is supposed to be about, and having generally socially left and economically right, or kind of making sure we have a good economy and good social issues, because generally in our society we have either or, not both.
Right. Okay, yeah, it's a fair assessment, and yeah, I mean, if you say it's close to the Liberal Party, but without kind of that super right-wing traditionalist facet to it, I suppose.
No nationals.
Yeah, no nationals. Okay, so that's kind of gives us a better idea about maybe what the policies are going to be about economically and socially. Here's an interesting question. Why do you think the Liberal Party or the coalition now has drifted maybe perhaps farther to the right than you would like?
Well, it's obviously got to do with the generational gap, because I'm a young person, meaning that it's much different to how things used to be. And once what was being a liberal is no longer being a liberal, and once was being a progressive is no longer being a progressive, and once was being a conservative is now ultra-conservative. The political landscape has slowly shifted right as we've moved forward on issues. Like gay marriage 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, 30 years ago, was still a controversial issue. That's why it only got passed now, whereas most people kind of see that as a normal thing. It's not necessarily normal, but it's much more accepted in our society than it once was. Yes. And the Liberal Party kind of has the national section of it, and their voices kind of pull them more to the right, because they've got to try and please them, and as they're not going to get into government otherwise, which is the problem.
Right. Yes.
So they can't stand for their values. Like, it's kind of like when Malcolm Turnbull tried to stamp down on the Nationals. It hasn't worked in a sense, because they can't get enough votes otherwise, unless they have that pairing in a sense.
Right. Malcolm Turnbull himself has actually been traditionally a bit more centrist than right wing. Would you agree with that assessment? And is Malcolm Turnbull somebody that you would want to emulate, or do you think that his leadership also has some issues?
Well, all politicians obviously have issues. They're politicians, not to be rude, but everybody has their flaws. But yeah, you are right in assessing him as more being a centrist, because he's much different to the rest of his party. Sure, he's economically right, but he's more socially left than the rest of his party. He's more of a moderate.
Yes.
Because he realises that, obviously with his own values as well, but he kind of emulates most Australian people on their social values, because that's basically how he got elected in a sense, because he's much more of a softer candidate compared to everybody else. So he sticks to more towards the centre, so he can get votes from both right and the left.
Right.
And kind of bring everybody together.
And sometimes, you're right, this can depend on the political landscape, whether people are really pulling left and right. If there's a much bigger divide, that creates these more extreme candidates. But when the social fabric tends to come together, then the more centrist candidates tend to do better. So, yeah, I think that's, like you said, it's going to be a dynamic change. But certainly it's a good explanation now about the sort of values and policies that your party wants to do. But let's get a bit more precise. Let's sort of go deeper and say, ideally, yeah, of course. But let's talk more about maybe some of the policies. So you yourself have developed a couple of policies on the site, and a few of them have been met with some popularity, bit of controversy, but let's talk about that now. So the first policy that you put forward for the previous cycle of elections was around an emissions trading scheme. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
If you guys don't know my co-host names, I'm a senior at my school, final year, get to go off to uni next year, so I'm a pretty young person, still need to learn more, but I was in my economics class, I was given a task about analysing whether an ETS and would be an effective climate change measure. And I came in quite sceptical of it to begin with, because I thought it's going to have some issues. But when I looked at the report I wrote, which is on, which you can see under the policy, before I wrote that, I actually wrote two reports separately, one from one side of the issue and other on the other side of the issue. So one against it and one for. And I kind of realised that it's not just good for the environment, but in Australia, businesses actually need some kind of policy, because Australia's been back and forth with an ETS, or what they used to be. It's now active, like action, the DAP, direct action policy or something.
Yeah, there's been many names for it and labels, and then you've got oppositions trying to call it a tax and a mining tax when it's maybe closer to a scheme, and there's different labels depending on what side you're on, for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of assess that we do need to do something for the environment. Sure, it's not going to make a global impact, but Australia is a leading nation, where a small nation with a massive economy, massive values, massive ideas, pretty progressive society compared to the rest of the world. So I wanted to make sure that when I did it, that I could have all the sides, and I found that every single area, except for people who were climate skeptics, believed and wanted to have an ETS, because it just made life easier for them, because it improved the environment, firstly. It put global pressure, it improved business, and it actually drove, one of the biggest things I like is it drives energy prices below, I know in California, below like $2. I know in California they were actually overnight getting negative energy prices.
Right.
So the companies would pay you to offload their energy.
And particularly that was completely welcome after what happened with Enron in the early 2000s, when I think the Californian people got completely shafted in many ways. There was a lot of loopholes in legislation, and it led to very high prices, blackouts, and it was a disaster. So there was certainly a good place to trial that ETS. When you said it could improve businesses, this is probably one of the criticisms that, say, the mining sector would have. And they would say, well, hang on, wouldn't an ETS increase our operating costs, and then we'd actually have to raise our wages and then raise our expenses, and how is that going to help the economy overall? What would you say to, those mining executives who might take issue with your sort of policy?
I mean, they have a valid point, as in that they employ a lot of people, so they need to maintain a decent enough profit to get investors and to keep people's wages up and keep the prices up. However, under most ETS schemes, like the direct action currently, the money they earn is put back into businesses, and you give them a grant to invest. So with the direct action, you do not get your grant unless you do something. But by forcing them to do something and then incentivizing it, they can earn their money back in a sense, even though it seems a little bit rigged. But and they can also get a heap of windfall profits, because with an ETS there's a certain amount of free allocations. So, and you can get tax deductions on those depending how it's set up. So for small businesses, and even big businesses like mining, there is ways around the system to ensure that they still maintain a decent profit.
Right.
Plus, it's also gonna change coal prices drastically, because as lots of them at the moment, they want to send all their resources overseas. So if they're not producing the emissions, they're going to be exempt from most of the actual taxes or whatever you want to call it placed onto them. Okay. And because they want that, it's going to be great for business, because they can export more of their product overseas. Currently, what they've been doing with gas prices, how they sent them overseas to stimulate our market up the price, they're going to be able to do that more, and they're going to be able to get a greater profit, because they'll be able to send more product overseas where the band is much higher and they want to pay more.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's a pretty good explanation. And again, a lot of this, I'd say a lot of people might agree once they see the facts, but unfortunately in politics, a lot of it can be spun in a certain way. And when you have big business that have this money to, and when you say, yeah, it's not bad for them, it might not be optimal, but this is when greed comes in and these other factors, and there's a whole nother discussion really. But certainly once you present the facts, it does look good.
Oh,
yes.
sorry.
Go on.
It's better than what it currently is.
Yes.
Because with the direct action, if you haven't read the report, they can check it out. But it's just businesses don't have the incentive to, and they're not sure if they want to, because they actually benefit. They get more money in return than from the scheme, whatever plan they do. They just have to implement a climate saving or reduction of emissions plan. They get more money in return, but businesses don't take the leap because it hasn't been used enough, so they're not comfortable with taking that leap. Whereas an ETS kind of forces it onto them,
right?
But it's done in a way so it's fair, and then they get comfortable with it. And once you're comfortable with something, you're okay with doing it, and you can improve how you do it. Meaning, sure, to start with, that's why the ETS has lots of opposition. When you start with it, it's going to be difficult, but once businesses adjust to it, they'll learn how to navigate it better.
Right. So it's like a lot of things. When you have some short-term pain, there's actually a long-term benefit, and you'd hope that some of the policies that are developed can have this kind of model where people will benefit in the long term, and it is going to be superior. Great. All right, so on to the next one, and this might need a bit of explanation. So you've put a policy recently about to amend the Sex and Racial Discrimination Act to eliminate positive discrimination. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
I was reading. I've always believed that discrimination, we can't have a double standard to it. And I was reading the policy, not the policy, but the law and the policy kind of like doctrine surrounding it of how to interpret it. And it's basically, from my interpretation and what I've read in other documents, and I can reference it if you need in the future, that when they interpret it, if you can basically discriminate against someone in order to give someone a positive benefit in a sense.
Right.
But I find that's a problem, because in lots of situations, it was when it needed to be, when like racism and sexism and just discrimination in general was part of society, it worked. But now we've moved away from that, and it's being misused to benefit certain groups more than others.
Right. Because
I found out that one of the key facts recently that came out is that government employers, they're more likely to employ someone who's female or from a minority, simply because simply because they can say that it's positive discrimination. They can favour that group because A, it looks better in the media, B, it looks better for all their colleagues because then they can use the diversity card, and C, they can justify it legally because they can say that it's helping someone out. So even if you have the same characteristics, same qualifications, same experience, it's kind of like you'll get favoured. It's kind of like back when they used to do the old fashion test, use a female name and a male name, and the male name would get picked over the female name.
Oh,
now it's the other way around.
And similarly with names of different cultural significance too. They did these studies in the US as well. Like if you have a black-sounding name and a white-sounding name. Yes, they had studies about this in employment, and they showed there is this kind of natural discrimination, but it is based on a whole rich history, so it's very difficult to kind of get away from. But with this positive discrimination, so your example might be the hiring of females or minorities not based on merit, but just based on this ability to kind of escape any consequence if anything goes wrong, or to be a safe choice? Right, okay.
Oh, not necessarily. It's that, but it's mainly because it looks better for companies, and another example is kind of like if you were to, for example, I'm not talking about getting rid of it for like schools, single-sex schools, single-sex workplaces. I'm talking about providing someone a service and taking it away from someone else simply because of the colour of their skin, which gender they are, those types of things. Because currently, just say you were to have the example on the Human Rights Commission website is a gym class.
Yes.
If women feel uncomfortable, you can have a women's only class. However, if there was in the United States, which has some legal effect here, I was reading up about it, people tried to make a male-only class.
Yes.
And they got in big trouble for it because they said men don't have, not necessarily men, it could be any group. If it was the other way around, I would still think it's atrocious. If I was favoured, I think that's unfair.
Yes, okay.
But it's just, it's kind of like it wasn't allowed to have that because they deemed that they didn't have a proper, it wasn't positive, it was just taking away. And I thought that's kind of bad. It's kind of like certain group-only scholarships. I understand it was designed for a certain group, that's reason. But picking applicants because of how they're born, what gender they are, instead of they're disadvantaged because they only have a single parent, or they're disadvantaged because they come from a remote area. I think that's wrong because it kind of divides us instead of making us together, because we should all be equal, and therefore we shouldn't see skin colour, or we shouldn't see race or religion or gender. We should just see who we are. So we should all be treated fairly, and we should be judged on our circumstances.
Absolutely.
Like we shouldn't have scholarships for certain race. We should I think that should be legal, but we shouldn't have an open scholarship and then pick someone above them simply because of their race. We should pick someone above them because of their circumstances, like single family, poor community, didn't go to school, or only graduated in year 10, for example. And it doesn't matter. And then that's fair on everybody, because it doesn't matter, in a sense, who you are. It makes it so it's a level playing field. So the discrimination against women can't rise again, but discrimination against men can't rise either. It keeps it at a balance point.
Okay, so you're going for equality throughout everything and fairness. And I think perhaps you probably should be asked the question, why are these policies in place? And sometimes it's just because to analyse each individual by case would just be far too time consuming. So I feel like perhaps certain things were implemented because it's just simpler to categorize. They say, well, this group of people are more likely to be disadvantaged, so let's give them more of an opportunity. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I understand your point, and obviously that's one of the reasons, and also because it looked really good at the time when they implemented these policies, and it was just the right thing to do because it was atrocious back then. But now we're at a point in society where we're basically, except for maybe LGBT issues, we're kind of on a level playing field. Everybody else is pretty much equal in Western culture.
Okay.
So it's kind of a redundant point anymore, because we have the ability not to see people via a categorization now. We have the time, the money, the resources, and we have the knowledge to be able to see people based on diversity of thought. And
I think that's the hope. This is probably the society that we want to move towards. But I think to have this underlying prejudice is still very natural and very difficult to completely eradicate.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
But yeah, absolutely. I think by having these policies, you should be encouraging moving towards being more rational, and to want to help equality of opportunity above any sort of. But just to get back, there's one other funny example I remember quite a few years ago now, because in Brisbane, I think it was, there was a men's club. I think it was a Tattersalls club, and it was a men's only club. And I think certain female businesswomen were outraged at not being accepted to this club, saying, "Oh, this discrimination. Why is it a men only club?" And yet, your case in point, there was clearly female gyms and female groups that men were not allowed to join. So, it has to be kind of a balance. It's either one way or the other. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So I suppose what you're saying is, decide on the rules, but don't have double standards. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I tried to sum up. But my ideal policy is that you still have to have segregated groups. You can't take away from someone. You can't take away from someone else's chance or right simply based off your identity. Because a men's shed or a women's group or whatever, that's fine. But you, for example, at a job, you can't just say, "I'm going to employ this person because they're white or a woman or they're a man or they're I don't know, well, whatever trait." If that makes sense, it should just be equal.
Yes, there's a lot of things written about this. If you haven't already, maybe you have, but there's a economist called John Rawls that's written a lot about social justice in this way. Very kind of similar attitudes that you put across in your policy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's a pretty good summary, I suppose, of what Toby and the Centrist Party is all about. So if you feel your views also align with that of Toby's and his party's, get on board, because it's going to be a time when people are going to be building their own parties from the ground up. And it's great ideas like this that get people excited, and getting more people on board is key at this moment. So if you think, well, I've heard this and I think, yeah, my views are pretty similar to Toby's, why not contact him on the site or on our Discord and join the party? Or if you don't agree, let us know why not, and we can have some party debates in the future. But that's probably it for now. So thank you very much for your time, Toby.
Oh, no, thank you. It's been really good.
All right, so you're welcome. So we will sign off now. And this has been Aussiocracy, and join us again soon for another debate.